I kind of get the feeling that over the last few years, there's been this sort of settling between what used to be affordable brands like Seiko and micro brands, and now you have these Chinese AliExpress brands sort of all getting into their own positions in the marketplace. To get a decent watch from Seiko, you've got to spend $250 to $300, and most decent micro brands are going to start at $350 and go up. And if you want to get something below $250, you go over to AliExpress, and they've got a lot of great watches in that price range. There are pros and cons to all of these, but typically when you look in this under $200 price range, you're kind of limited to these AliExpress brands. And the biggest con with those is often that they lack any originality in their designs. In other words, if you want something that's not a copy of another watch, you typically have to spend a little bit more money. But there is one micro brand that has a strong focus on design and their own design identity and style, and also a commitment to keeping prices insanely low. And that brand is Aragon, and that's something that I think makes them really distinct. Wing, their owner/designer, has his own style when it comes to watches, and his sense of style is anything but boring. Today we're looking at one of his most affordable and wearable dive watches, coming in at only 40 millimeters of diameter and a price of $165. This is the DF40 from Aragon. Hey guys, welcome back to Just the Watch. My name's Dave. I live in Japan and I love to collect affordable watches. Today we're taking a look at a watch from Aragon. I've featured them on the channel a few times before, and as someone who's been interested in affordable watches, they have been a brand that I have always been looking at since I started collecting watches, because they often have such a good value. In fact, they were putting out very high quality watches in the $100 to $200 price range really before the recent wave of Chinese watches from AliExpress kind of got going. And they're one of the few micro brands that continues to compete with these Chinese factory brands in that price range, while offering original designs as well. Now, Wing's style typically leans more towards the aggressive or flashy look. Often his watches are oversized and large. In a lot of ways, they remind me of some of Invicta's designs, but not as cheesy and at a much higher quality. The watch that we're looking at today, the DF40, makes an interesting use of engraving, which is something that's not typically seen in a lot of micro brand watches. You're getting an engraved bezel as well as engraving on the bracelet itself that gives this watch a very unique look, but it has a very classic and legible dial design, as well as a moderate case size that makes this watch very wearable, even if you're not into super aggressive watches. Now, this watch was sent in for free by the brand, which is why you saw the paid promotions flag at the beginning of this video. However, other than the watch itself, I did not receive any additional compensation, nor did the brand have any control over the content of this review. So I think there's two main things that make this watch from Aragon attractive. The first is that it is a very good value. You are getting excellent specs for that $185 price point, particularly that 500 meters of water resistance with the helium escape valve. You don't see that very often in watches in this price range. That's one of the wonders of modern watchmaking, that you're able to get features like this in a watch that costs this little money. Up until a few years ago, this was the sort of thing that was limited to luxury watches costing thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. So the fact that you can get that for under $200 is still kind of insane. But it is something that's becoming more common because of the rise of Chinese manufacturers who are selling direct to the public. And that brings us around to the second major selling point about this watch, and that is that it has a very interesting and unique design. Most of the AliExpress brands that are selling extremely cheap, well-spec'd watches like this tend to copy other designs rather than innovate and create new original ones, but Aragon is run and owned by Wing Liang, who is his own watch designer. And over the years, Wing has developed a very particular style and flair. And while his designs can be a bit polarizing, they are distinct and they do have this kind of Aragon look to them. It's the kind of thing that leads people to collect Aragon watches because they like that style. And that style is defined by a bold visual look. These are timepieces that are meant to be attention-getting. Historically, they have done a lot of very large timepieces, but recently they've been exploring watches more in this 40 millimeter size like the one that we're looking at today. In the case of the DF40 automatic that we're looking at today, this is a dive watch that has a lot of very classic design cues, but has been accented with a very interesting and high-quality stainless steel engraved bezel and a stainless steel bracelet that features an interesting texture on it. Both of these are things that are fairly unusual in the traditional watch scene, and they serve to give this watch its own distinct personality. The bezel is deeply engraved with a reverse relief so that pretty much the entire bezel is cut out except for the numbers, which remain raised up, with the carved out portion of the bezel stained with a black color and the numerals in a contrasting polished silver colored finish. And I think this is the defining visual feature of this watch. This is something that you don't see very often, and yet it's implemented here in a very tasteful and simple way. It has this kind of cool, almost gothic look to it, but it's pretty subtle. It doesn't make the watch come across as some kind of like a costume piece. And that balance between doing something interesting and unique and not pushing it too far into that sort of weird territory is something that's pretty hard to do, and yet Aragon pulled it off brilliantly here. And to lean into that even more, they've done this kind of texturing on the center link of the bracelets, which again is an extremely unusual touch. Most of the finish work that you're going to find on cases and bracelets is going to be limited to brushing, polishing, and bead blasting. Engraving is far less common. And once again, it gives the watch a very unique look without pushing it over the top. And what I think really ties this whole thing together is that texture on the center links of the bracelet is pretty similar to the texturing, the knurling on the crown of the watch itself. And seeing that pattern in those two places really ties the whole design together. So this is a really clean, well thought out use of this engraving technique. And the fact that you're seeing that on a watch with these specs under $200 is, again, kind of insane. These little flares of unique and customized design flourishes are typically things that you just can't find in this price range. Most watches under $200 are going to be put together from very commonly produced parts. They're not going to include custom components like this. So you tend to wind up with a lot of watches that look very similar to other watches out there, very generic looking. And because of the engraving and texturing work, this definitely does not look generic. That said, one of the things that I've been most impressed with on this watch is actually the dial design. And this is an area where Aragon didn't choose to do anything unique or out there. They just wound up putting together one of the best dials that I've seen. The particular color variant that I have in is the full lume version. So this is a lumed dial that comes across as white in the daylight, but glows a blue in the dark. So in terms of dial design here, you're working with a white dial, which can often be difficult, but I think they've done an excellent job by creating these black outlined applied markers that have a strong contrast against that dial. And this stark contrast carries over in the design of the hands and all of the text and other markings on the dial as well. The markers have a rounded style with bars at 12, 6, and 9, and circles at all of the others except for 3 o'clock, which has a date window that's also outlined in black. And I absolutely love the way that this works. I love the simplicity. I love the contrast. It's just a very easy to read and well done white dial dive watch. Now, this is a fully lume dial, so let's talk about that for a second. The dial itself is done in BGW9, so it glows a blue color, while the indexes and hands appear to be C3, so they have a green glow in the dark. So you're getting a little bit of color contrast there, which helps to increase the after dark visibility. Realistically, if visibility is your chief concern on a fully lume dial, you want to go with just completely blacked out hands and markers so that they are essentially black against the blue light behind them. When you also lume the hands and markers on top of a lume dial, that tends to reduce contrast, as the only way you can distinguish them is either by the different colors or by those black surrounds. But either way, the lume here isn't particularly powerful. It's okay. It looks great for a little bit, so it's mostly an aesthetic thing. Functionally, it's all going to wear out relatively quickly, and this is the one area where I do see Aragon a little bit lagging behind. Their lume often looks good when it's fully charged, but it doesn't tend to last very long, and this one came in with a score of 4 on my J-score scale, which again, not terrible, but definitely below average. But while the performance of the lume isn't particularly impressive, on pretty much every other technical aspect this watch delivers, starting with that 500 meters of water resistance with the helium escape valve. Now, this is not a practical thing. Nobody is ever going to take this watch diving down to 500 meters. This is just an engineering flex, which is a big part of watchmaking. People love watches not because they're actually going to use them for the ways that they've been designed, but because of the fact that they have been designed in a way to handle these extreme environments. Nobody buys an Omega Speedmaster expecting that they're going to go land on the moon. And in the same way, nobody's going to be purchasing this watch to go saturation diving with it. That said, it's an astounding work of both engineering and economics that you're able to produce a watch with that feature, with that water resistance rating at under $200. Throw in the fact that this watch also has a sapphire crystal with anti-reflective coating, a solid bracelet with solid end links, and a decent milled clasp that's better than the clasp that Seiko will give you from its dive watches that cost $500. And so it's this combination of excellent value and distinctive design that really makes Aragon something special in my opinion. And now the fact that they're producing watches in this extremely wearable 40mm size really opens them up to anybody who's looking for kind of a fun, interesting, a little bit unique style of watch that's also incredibly low priced. Now, because of the design choices with that engraved bezel and that texturing on the dial, this isn't going to be like a mass market watch that's an easy go buy for anybody. You have to have a personality that matches a watch like this. But if this style of watch draws you in and you're looking for a watch in this $200 price range, I think this one's an easy recommendation. You're going to be hard pressed to find anything remotely like this at this price point. All right, guys, that's going to wrap up this review. Let me know what you think of it down in the comments. Like I said, I especially like the dial of this watch. This is one of the best polar style dials that I've seen on any watch, especially one coming in at this price range. If you're interested in picking this up, I'll leave a link to Argon down below in the description. That's going to wrap it up for today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys later. Bye.